Alrighty, folks, coming at you guys today with another spreadsheet video. It's been since the release of Rena that I did the last spreadsheet video. That one was really just to break down how overpowered Rena is at release. Since then, guess what? She must be balanced because she didn't get nerfed in the last patch. We're not going to go into that though. Let's get into this Akeron spreadsheet. Wanted to do some calculations because on the very first day that this hero was released, when I hopped in a party with Connor, aka Clemson, if you've seen us play with him before, the first thing he said was, "This new hero's got 2 ults. I just hit somebody with the fireball for half their health." So I gotta dive into the scaling on this ability because it's pretty crazy, being that it gets extra projectiles based on haste scaling and then split scaling between both physical and magical. A lot of calculations to be done here. Took a lot of mathematical problem solving to put this together, so I hope you guys appreciate it. Timestamps below if you want to skip past all these numbers. You can go straight to the conclusions or straight to the item comparisons table. We'll cover that in the second half of this video. Thanks everybody for stopping by, man. We've been having fun on Pred. Even if it's not a MOBA, we've been having fun on it, man. Let's get right into it. Spreadsheet. This spreadsheet that I'm going to go through here is also available, linked in the description if you want to open it up and play around in it yourself. So diving right into it, we're focusing on the Hellfire ability. Hellfire is when you fire that eyeball out and it drops projectiles down from it and it shoots projectiles out of it to hit nearby enemies. It also slows. We're focusing on the damage. The slow is pretty significant though. Stacking up to a 40% slow is quite strong. So this is the scaling that it gets. At max level, or at all levels, it fires 10 projectiles plus 10% of your built ability haste as additional projectile fireballs. Each deal 15, scaling up to 95 at max level, with 9% physical scaling and 12.5% magical scaling. That's pretty decent scaling considering how many projectiles this is. The big caveat to it, and what realistically made these calculations so difficult, was each subsequent hit deals 20% less damage, stacking to 80% damage reduction once they have been hit with 4 projectiles. So the way that this works out is, also when awakened, it fires, the number of fireballs is increased. They don't tell us by how many, but when he's awakened, the description reads that the number of fireballs is increased. So the formula for the theoretical total damage output by this ability prior to armor mitigation is this formula that I have here. It's 95 base damage. This is at max level. 95 base damage plus the physical scaling plus the magical scaling for the first shot. For the second shot, it's the same thing, 95 base damage plus the physical and magical scaling, but it's only at 80% because it's 20% damage reduction each shot. Same thing for the third projectile is doing 60% damage, the fourth projectile doing 40% damage, and then each additional projectile is dealing the same amount but 20% of the total damage output, and the number of projectiles after the fourth one is 6 because it always does at least 10 plus 10% of your haste. As I've outlined here, these are the variables here: physical power, magical power, and haste. Scales off of all 3. So as an example right here, if you've got 200 physical power, 200 magical power, which is pretty easy to build that amount of each, and 60 haste, again pretty easy to build by the end game, you do this amount of damage. You can see each term: the first shot, the second shot, third shot, fourth shot, and then shots 5 through 10 plus the additional shots gained from the haste times 20% because that's how much damage all of those are doing, and the same damage term here, totaling to pre-mitigated damage of 717. That is pretty decent, to be fair. That is pretty decent. We'll look, like I said, in the item comparison table about how to get the most out of this damage, what items you should be building to get the most out of this damage, but that's what we're looking at. But what we're really concerned with is not the total base damage. We're really looking for the formula for theoretical damage added, because I could calculate the base damage dealt pre-mitigation of each item, but what really matters more than that is items compared to each other. Which items can I build to do more damage than other items? That's what we're looking at here. So this is the theoretical formula for damage added. It is the damage the same damage formula except without the base damage in it. So you see this first term for shot 1 is just the scaling. The second term for shot 2 is just the scaling again, but it's 80% of the damage from scaling because each subsequent shot deals 20% less damage. Same thing here, shot 3, shot 4, shots 5 through 10, because all of those are going to come out no matter how much haste you have. And then the next term is shots added by haste. That has to be a separate term from shots 6 through 10, or from 5 through 10, because adding these additional projectiles via adding ability haste will get you additional base damage per shot, because they each deal 95 base damage per shot. So this one has the 95 base damage per shot in it, meaning haste is going to be extra valuable here. 10% of your haste goes into becoming extra projectiles. That is still on a 20% multiplier because every shot after the fourth is only dealing 20%. And then I've added a flat mage pin, or flat magical pin bonus in here. It's kind of hard to calculate armor in this game. That's what makes these calculations so difficult. Armor mitigation works very weird. If we had the formulas available to us for how armor interacted with pre-mitigated damage, it would be a lot easier, but just created a term here knowing that we'd have to solve it later for a better multiplier on it. So that's what we got into here. So using that formula, crunching the numbers on an item like Astral Catalyst, which gives 80 magical power and 20 haste, the damage is this formula right here. It's the same damage added formula that I just broke down right here with these numbers plugged into it. 80 magical power, 20 haste. You can see it's entered here in a big long formula. I hope you guys can appreciate the amount of math that went into this, because you get any one of these parentheses wrong and the formula is cooked. So here's what that damage number calculation comes out to from this formula. Came out to adding about 82 damage. Now, because of the way that I calculated bonus physical flat pin, we also needed to test out an item that had flat pin on it but no ability haste to get the kind of best averages we can here. So we chose Wraith Leggings. It gives 95 magical power and 10 flat pin, meaning that it's the same calculation as above. All these same damage terms, they get their 95 damage plugged into them rather than 80 magical power. They get 95. And then this extra shots added term, of course, goes to 0 because there's 0 haste on Wraith Leggings. But this flat pin term goes up to quite a lot, 100, because I'm just assuming that, 10 flat pin means 10 extra damage added per projectile. That, of course, is not how it works, but we had to start somewhere. So that came out to 147.5 damage added. Now that seems quite high. That obviously was too high. We knew that going into this, but we just had to get some numbers down so that we can do some problem solving here. So following that, went into the testing arena. So I have got a ton of testing arena clips. I'm not going to put them all on the screen here because it would take I think I have over 20 testing arena clips in here. I'll put the ones on the screen that are most relative. But what we did is go in here, ranked up to level 9. Level 9 is when you can have Hellfire at max level. Made sure we had no passive stacks, and fired the Hellfire into the Steel Dummy, who has no items on it. And we had to break his passive shield as well, just to make sure that there wasn't bonus damage coming from Astral Cat against shields and stuff like that. So with his shield down, keeping in mind that at level 9 Steel, the test dummy with no items has 37 magical armor just from leveling up. The damage dealt with no items, which I'll put on the screen, popped up between 401 and 402. I'm assuming it was around 401.5, and it just kind of averaged it one way or the other each time. But testing it multiple times, it always came up either 401 or 402 total damage if you land all the projectiles. Doing the same test, except putting on Astral Cat, of course making sure I have on Titan's Crest and everything, so I'm not getting any crest power or anything, just the power and haste from Astral Cat. The damage came out to 506, which means the damage added was 104. Now, doing the same test with Wraith Leggings, it came up to, same conditions, came up to 487, meaning only added 85 damage, significantly less damage than was added from the haste of Astral Cat. So, whereas in these formulas, it looked like adding flat pin was going to be way more valuable than haste, It actually was the other way around quite significantly, and the Astral Cat putting out an even higher damage added number than the calculatable damage added number means that the larger damage numbers were going through his armor more effectively in comparison to even having Pin. The larger damage numbers and the additional projectiles were going through his armor more effectively. So how do we solve for this? Well, if you're a math guy, you know how we solve for this. We've got basically two terms to this equation. We've got the first term, which is a big set of damage numbers that are pretty much locked in. We know that the scaling is what the scaling is on those. Then we've got a second term, which is an adjustment for flat pin. So we take the Astral Cat formula. We know that the pin term goes to 0 because Astral Cat has no pin on it. And we can just put a modifier to convert what this damage added calculated theoretically is, to convert it to what the damage added was in reality. This adjusts for larger damage numbers going through armor more effectively, because armor doesn't mitigate as a percentage, it mitigates dependent on how big the hit is that hits it, so it is what it is. Adjusting for that, we get this modifier that we're going to put on the total damage dealt term. Of course, I get it, this is only really applicable under these specific circumstances, this specific amount of magical armor, this specific amount of power and damage per projectile, but it's as good as we can get as far as estimating comparing one item to another, considering I will be testing all of these at level 9 against the same level 9 steel test dummy. So then slapping that term into the Wraith Leggings formula on the damage term, we calculate how much damage the second term, the flat pin term, should have to deal to reach the actual tested 85 damage that Wraith Leggings added. So slapping this multiplier on the damage term side of the Wraith Leggings formula, we came out to 60, a little over 60 damage. Again, here's a massive formula that you have to enter without making any errors to get that number. Of course, I cross-reference all of these on the good old 84, the OG, and did confirm all these numbers by hand because, you know, it's just easier to do this on paper than it is to try to get all these parentheses right in the first time and trust yourself to do that. So, knowing that this came out to 60, that means there's about 24, almost 25 damage left over that we need to make that flat pin term equal to equalize the damage here. So that comes out to, and the original term did equal 100, so that comes out to giving us a modifier of 0.2477. Anyway, all of that is to say that doing all of that problem solving with math, we've formulated this final formula here. Hopefully it's all visible on the screen. Let me check OBS. It is barely visible on the screen, but it's visible on the screen. This long formula right here, which is the same formula as we mentioned up here. It is a big long damage number term, which is locked in. It's the scaling, it's how much you get, the haste added from the extra projectiles, all that. And then a bonus flat pin term. Right here is where I outlined it: shot 1, shot 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 through 10, haste added shots, and then flat pin. Now we've got this modifier on the damage term as we calculated with the Astral Cat calculations, and then this modifier over here, which is the same as this one, on the flat pin bonus damage term to equalize our equation out to make it so that both of these equations yield true results, or yield results that are accurate to our testing. So to test out this new equation, because again, we don't just want to take this on faith that I did all the math correct and the equation came out correctly. We wanted to test it with an item preferably that includes both flat pin and ability haste, as neither Astral Cat or Wraith Leggings included both. Now, there's only one item in the game that includes both flat pin and ability haste, and that is Spirit of Amir. Spirit of Amir gives 70 plus 8% magical power when you're not in the jungle, totaling to 75.6, 10 haste, and 7 flat pin. Plugging all of those into this new equation that we formulated with the two modifiers on it, a flat pin modifier and a damage modifier, we crunched it all out, again entered it into this big long equation, and had to figure out where the missing parentheses were, and finally got it to add up to 93.49. Crunching the numbers on the calculator by hand, again, it does come out to this. So this is accurate with no damage dealt. Again, 401 to 402 is what we're looking for. Hopping in there with Spirit of Amir on in the test arena, we were able to get in the 497 range, meaning that the damage added came out to 95. That is as close as we're going to get. I am happy with getting that close on estimating the damage added from this, being that there are so many variables at play. So that's close enough for me. The point here is to compare items to each other, not crunch a specific down to the one damage number amount of damage added per item. So this formula should be able to compare items to each other within a few percent. Obviously, we're looking at something around 94 versus something around 95, and that's not even factoring in the damage dealt being slightly rounded depending on which, test scenario you're in. So that's good enough to me. We're going to compare with items within a few percentage points of each other, with the only major difference coming from target magical armor and how armor interacts with different sized damage instances. That was a lot of math, guys. That was a lot of math. Like I said, if you're a big math guy and you want to come in here, look at all these numbers for yourself, check out the spreadsheet in the description. Come in here, just find some errors too, please. If you're someone who just wants to find errors and show me that I'm wrong, please do that, because it's not about me being right, it's about the numbers being right. So check it out if you're a fan of numbers, if you're a fan of mathematics and engineering. This is like honestly, you could teach a course on problem solving with equations through this, and how you want to solve real world problems with using equations of multiple variables. So that's all the math I've got for you guys today. Let's hop into the actual item comparisons. Which items are best? Which items add the most damage? That's what we're here for. Here is the table. Let's zoom in a little bit more on this one. Here's the table. What I've done here is exactly what you would expect. I've added the items. What I've done, of course, to draw all of these items up is gone on the predecessor items page on a meta.city, gone on builds for Akeron and picked all of the most frequently built items, all of the items with the highest pick rates and win rates on Akeron, and put them all in here. Made a column for their physical power, for their magical power, for the ability haste they add, and for the magical pin that they add, because those are really the only variables that we care about. Everything beyond that is going to be item passive procs that are going to be pretty much impossible to calculate in a spreadsheet table like this. You'd have to do individual testing for each of them. So then I plugged in this big long formula right here. Like I said, come play around in here, but be careful, because you mess up any of these parentheses, the formula's cooked. Plugged in this big long formula here associated with each of these stats that these items give, and it gave us an estimated damage added number for each of these items without having to do testing. Now, of course, I wanted to make sure this stuff was correct, so I went in here and also did a lot of testing. That's why I said I have a ton of testing clips. I'll put some of them up on the screen here just to show you guys. I was very thorough with testing these multiple times under the same circumstances each time to try to confirm or deny my numbers, give us a good representation of how the calculations compare to in-game effects, because the armor mitigation is a true mystery. I've also added another category over here for significant passive damage added or unique tech value. These are items that you should be looking at beyond just the total damage number added to your Hellfire, but can give you damage added elsewhere, or can give you situational procs that will come out as more damage. So looking at this chart, when I originally did the calculations, we can see a couple of standouts. First off, Astral Cat, of course, since it gives 20 haste, gives a huge amount of added damage because you fire 2 additional projectiles with that 20 haste. The same story can be said for any other 20 haste item, like Noxia adds massive damage, pretty much the highest damage you can add, because it is a solid power number and 20 haste, meaning 2 extra projectiles. You can see the items that add flat pin don't necessarily add nearly as much as having those extra projectiles. just because of the way that this is calculated. Extra projectiles, adding that extra base damage is a lot more valuable. Again, on the physical side of things, the standouts are items that have big haste. Basilisk coming with 20 haste means 2 extra projectiles being fired. That base damage is generally more valuable than adding additional damage per projectile. Coming down through here, you see Life Binder's in a good spot as well. There's other items that are very close. A lot of these magical items are very close as long as they give reasonable haste, but haste is really where you want to be. Now, getting into the testing side of things, you see that a lot of these, some of these are very accurate, some of these are very close to, we should probably highlight that one as well because that's a pretty solid one, right? 95 is great. Some of these are very close to their estimated numbers, while some of them are a little bit further off. You see all of these right here are actually higher, significantly higher. I mean, Basilisk is a little bit higher, but these other ones significantly higher than their estimated totals. You'll notice a trend if you take a look at the table on why this is. You see right here Entropy, obviously Entropy adding a very strong passive effect, so that's not the best example. But items like here, like Solaris adding 72, it shouldn't have added anywhere near 72, right? Mind Razor adding 82, that's the most of any physical item. That's the most of any physical power item. Just for adding 46 power and 15 haste, that doesn't really add up, right? Same thing here, Golem's Gift, Tainted Blade, why are these adding so much damage? It's because I was testing all of these with the passive on 0 stacks, because as your passive stacks up, you gain extra haste. I was testing all of these at 0 stacks, and in that circumstance where you have just 15 haste reading on your stat bar, it rounds the number of projectiles up from, instead of where you have 10 haste, it gives you 11 projectiles total. When you have 20 haste, it gives you 12 projectiles total. When you have 15 or 16 haste, it rounds that up to 2 additional projectiles instead of just 1. So, with only 1 item built and with no extra passive stacks going, 15 haste is equivalent to 20 haste in the number of projectiles it gives you because it rounds it up. So these items that give you 15 haste, building them as a first item is going to give you, at least with no passive stacks going, the same effect as if it had 20 haste, which is kind of crazy. Obviously my calculations are like, super accurate down to the decimal or whatever, so it's not going to round up 15 to 20 haste like that. It's just going to split the number of shots, which obviously you can't fire half of a projectile, but anyway, that's why you see these large discrepancies. It's because the game rounds up at 15 haste the number of projectiles straight to being equivalent to 20 haste. So that was good testing to know. That was very very beneficial. I didn't know when the rounding point was going to be. It is right at 15. So of course, once your passive starts getting stacked up, 20 haste will be better than 15 haste because it could potentially get you, it means you have to get less passive stacks to get that 13th projectile, but 1 item to 1 item at 0 passive stacks, 15 haste is equivalent. So looking through these, we've got some big standouts, of course. Tainted Blade, very solid. Like I said, Mind Razor on the physical side of things is the most damage added of any of the physical power items because it does not get as good a physical power scaling as it does magical. Solaris, kind of a surprising one here. I guess it shouldn't be, being that it has 15 haste, but pretty surprising being that it's a crit item, adds solid extra damage. All of these items that give 20 or 15 haste, very solid. Of course, the highest damage added items are the magical power items that also add decent haste. Spirit of Amir, a honorable mention, as it does get up to 95 damage added with only adding 10 haste. Pretty solid, and it has a good scaling passive to give you extra power as you build other magical power items. So that's really what we wanted to highlight here. Items like Oblivion Crown, where it gives you a massive damage number but doesn't give you any haste or pin, really do not stack up to much damage added on the Hellfire, at least by itself. Of course, if you had extra magical power items, the Oblivion Crown passive would give you a ton more power, so that'd be more of a late game item. Items like Caustica, I again expected to add big damage, as Caustica always does, because it mitigates so much armor, but without any flat pin and without any haste, meaning no projectiles added, Constica by itself cannot keep up with some of these big haste items like Astral Cat, like Noxia. So that's where we're at on these. You can pause this anywhere or pull the spreadsheet up and look at all these highlighted items. But we're going to go through a conclusions down here at the bottom and give you my breakdown here at the end of what's going on here. So in conclusion, haste is the name of the game. It's the name of the early game on Akeron. It's really the name of the late game. It's what you get the most damage out of on Akeron, being that he has scaling. Having extra projectiles means more for his Hellfire's damage than dealing extra projectile damage, or dealing extra damage per projectile. You can have a big power number, you can even have flat pin, you can even have percent pin in the form of Constica. But if you don't have the haste to fire extra projectiles, it's pretty much meaningless as far as damage added. So, Hellfire projectile count bonus from ability haste rounds up, like I mentioned. So both 15 haste and 20 haste as a first item beginning of the game gives 12 projectiles before your passive, or 2 extra projectiles beyond the 10 that the ability starts with. So keep that in mind. If you're just going first item to first item, assuming you have no passive stacks, 15 is basically equivalent to 20, which opens up a lot more first item builds for you. I would still recommend, obviously, a 20 haste item to start, but 15 can get it done pretty well because of the way that the rounding works. Next, while many high-power magical items add the most damage, as we saw, all of these yellow ones that I've highlighted are magical items. You've got Lifebinder, 15 haste on it and big power. You've got Astral Cat, 20 haste on it and big power. These are all magical items because it does get better magical scaling. While these high-power magical items add the most damage, physical items with high haste are comparable. You can see that it's not that big of a damage drop to go from building something like Basilisk to go to building something like Oathkeeper or Lifebinder or Noxia. It's a 20 to 30 difference in damage added, which is pretty respectable for what you get outside of just the pure power and haste that most of these magical items give. So keep that in mind, that a lot of these physical items are pretty comparable, especially Mind Razor, which performed the best of any physical item. So it's probably always worth trading that 20 to 30 points of potential extra damage, assuming you land the entire Hellfire, for better tech items if you're interested in any of these physical items, like Lifesteal, Anti-Heal, or Armor, or Health even, which you normally pick up from these physical items like Basilisk, Mutilator, Aug, Draconum. Salvation, you can pick up, now Salvation's not a great example because it doesn't come with haste, but you can pick up extra tech such as Anti-Heal in the form of Tainted Blade. You're not sacrificing much in the damage department to pick up Anti-Heal on Tainted Blade, as well as an extra health pool, or to pick up extra armor on Draconum plus extra healing. You're not sacrificing that much Hellfire damage, so it's almost always going to be worth it to pick up those tech items, even if it means you're doing 20 to 30 less points of damage per Hellfire. So let's get into it. Item recommendations, what we're all here for, what items should we be building. I skipped straight to this part in the video. I don't care about all the math, I don't care about all the breakdowns. Just tell me what to build first and second item, and I'll be on my way. Well, if you only care about max damage, if you're playing mid lane Akeron, if you're playing solo lane Akeron and you want to sit back and farm and just do big damage, you need 15 to 20 haste out of each of your first 2 items, preferably being magic items with extra damage procs. That's how you're going to get the max damage possible. Your best option for this is the combination of Noxia plus Entropy. This combination, if you look up here, Noxia, of course, giving big power, 20 haste, decent and a good proc on top of it, and then Entropy, of course, giving solid power, giving solid haste, giving a big mana pool as well, and then giving a very valuable damage proc. Having this combination gives you 150 magic power, 35 haste, and 2 bonus damage procs out of your first 2 items. That is pretty much unbeatable amounts of damage added to his Hellfire. But like I mentioned above, while this will do oppressive damage early and really could force you into a snowball, poke people out from range too, because this ability does have great range, you sacrifice any sustained tech or survivability These items don't come with health sustain, with lifesteal, with anti-heal, with armor, any of that. So you're sacrificing a lot to do that, but if that's what you want to do, Noxia Entropy combo, first 2 items, in either order, preferably, it really doesn't matter, they're going to be very equivalent. Noxia and Entropy, as your first 2, will yield massive damage. But, depending on the role that you're playing and your matchup, you are likely there are likely better options to be had in the physical power category, like I mentioned. We've got Basilisk, Draconum, Mind Razor, Tainted Blade, and Magnify. Magnify being the outlier as it does give magical. But all of these offer good haste and comparable damage added to the big dogs of Noxia and Entropy, but have great tech associated with them. We look at something like we just mentioned above, Draconum. I mean, you really cannot overstate how strong of Draconum is in the trading with your solo lane department. For a very minimal loss in added damage to your Hellfire, you're picking up armor and extra healing. It's just, you're not going to quite do as much damage, but the trade value or your gank potential, if you're building Basilisk first item, your gank potential coming out of jungle is going to be so much stronger, putting that armor shred on people, getting that bonus movement speed, in comparison to just building Noxia or Entropy, where yes, you will deal more damage, but you will not have as big of a health pool or as good of tech options. So usually in most circumstances, most matchups, most roles, you're going to get more mileage out of these tech options that come with comparable damage added to your Hellfire. Next, while ability haste for cooldown purposes falls off, haste for Hellfire added projectiles does not. As you build more ability haste, your abilities can only get so much shorter cooldowns. The more haste you build, the less you get from building additional haste as far as cooldowns are concerned. As far as the extra projectiles added to his Hellfire is concerned, there is no fall off. The 15 haste you build at the beginning of the game gives you as many projectiles as it does at the end of the game, especially with how his passive works. So don't shy away from building 4 to 5 haste items in a row to start off your Akeron builds. His passive will boost your haste even higher as you stack it up, meaning even more projectiles. So you can easily get to situations with building 4 and 5 haste items in a row, and then getting the bonus from his passive where you've got well over 100 ability haste, and you're firing tons of extra projectiles. You're firing 12 more projectiles than the base projectiles. You're firing 20 plus projectiles. So don't shy away from building a ton of haste. Haste is really the name of the game on Akeron. So that's the breakdown for the early game. Some other nice early sleeper picks include Golem's Gift. Golem's Gift came out with a ridiculously high amount of damage added because of its passive. It stacks up to 5 times. Golem's Gift, I've put all these items down here as well. If you're not familiar with any of these highlighted items right here in these paragraphs that I'm mentioning, I've put all of them down here so you can either pause the video at any point here and check them out, or open up the spreadsheet for yourself, or like I said, go on Ometa City's items page, which I've linked below, to view these items. Golem's Gift, because of the way the passive works, it gives you a ton of extra power, and since it comes with 15 haste, you get extra projectiles from it as well. So Golem's Gift, a very solid sleeper pick in solo lane or potentially in jungle. Cresselia as well, being a very high, you know I'm a fan of Cresselia if you've been watching me play any sort of magical heroes, giving a very high damage added for how cheap this is because it comes with 20 haste. So Cresselia, don't count Cresselia out. Great mana sustain as well if you're in solo lane. This could be a key pickup if you don't want to pick up any sort of health or sustain item first. And then other sleeper picks, you've got Solaris, like I said, good damage added with some extra crit tech and healing and true damage tech on autos. Spirit of Amir scales well into the late game, gives you haste and flat pin, pretty solid. Prophecy, not bad, not bad. Like I said, since it gives 15 haste and it rounds that damage number up, building Prophecy first item could give you pretty solid damage added, especially if you're comboing it with an additional magical item second, or a magical item first and then Prophecy second. You're getting great value from Prophecy. All of these offer haste and fun tech to play around with. Try some stuff out for yourself. This isn't all that you could build here. You could always throw Plasma Blade in here and some other stuff like that, or some other of your favorite tech items from this. You could build Orb of Growth if you're a big Orb of Growth fan. Just keep in mind it doesn't come with haste, so it's going to be kind of hard to get that damage out early. You can build Azure Core. Azure Core is great value, as we'll mention here in just a second, if you just want to get Alkrod on and finish it later. Speaking of which, going into the late game, haste will continue to give you big value all game. As I mentioned, 70 plus, as I mentioned above here, there's no fall off on the haste because of the way that this Hellfire scales. So 70 plus haste realistically should really be your target for the in-game build. You should have 70 plus haste. It's not hard to build 70 plus haste either. So, I mean, building 4 items with 15 haste and 1 item with 20 haste will put you at 80 haste at the end of the game before your passive. I would always target building as much haste as possible on this hero. That's just to get as much out of his Hellfire as you can. Also helps you spam his other abilities, which is quite fun because the Bite gives you a ton of healing, and the Spider Web, you know, is great range CC, so it is what it is. Build as much haste as possible. So if you do build this, if you build, like, you know, like I said, 4 items with 15 and 1 item with 20 haste, giving you 80 haste, that means that when awakened at max passive stacks, your Hellfire will spawn well over 20 projectiles. You're talking 22, 23 projectiles, each dealing huge damage, and potentially proccing entropy and stuff as well. So don't shy away from haste. In late game, build as much haste as you can. Just keep building it. And of course, the usual expected late game items will still add the most damage, assuming normal team comp circumstances, assuming they have a tank somewhere, assuming they have a couple of damage dealers, assuming you're building a couple magic power items. Oblivion Crown and Caustica both add massive damage and get more valuable the more magic power you have in the case of Oblivion Crown, and the more magic armor they have in the case of Caustica. So those two are pretty much staples now on any mage. The majority of Akeron's damage is magical damage, so keep those in mind. Also, the scaling items like Mindrazor, Azure Core, and Worldbreaker all offer big benefits to Akeron, which are good haste, big power, and back-end percent damage bonuses. If we come up here and look at Mindrazor, as I've already mentioned, is one of the highest, it's actually the highest physical power item as far as added damage. And then you've also got Azure Core, which I wanted to test out at full stacks, but I couldn't test it out at full stacks because it wasn't really feasible at level 9 in the way the practice arena functions. But with 0 stacks, it still added solid damage at 94. At max stacks, it's going to add significantly more, especially if you're comboing it with Mindrazor. And then Worldbreaker, again, doesn't add very much by itself because it doesn't add haste by itself, but it adds back-end percent bonus damage and health scaling. So if you're building a couple health items, Worldbreaker is going to be massively valuable for you, being that his abilities stack up so many times. Also, final point here, entropy cannot be ignored. Like I just mentioned, it will proc up to 5 times, potentially 6 times, depending on the circumstances. I got it to proc 5 or 6 times the majority of the time, but it will proc up to 5 times if you land a full Hellfire on somebody. That is a lot of added damage, but it's not worth building if it's your only magical power item, because of the way this item scales, you need other magical power items to go with it to get that scaling, but it can proc a bunch of times in a single Hellfire because of how long the duration is that those projectiles come out. So that's what I've got to mention for you guys. Like I said, all of these bold terms up here, I have added pictures from Ometa City of each of them. Here's Entropy, you know, it's a classic, deals 3 plus 3% additional damage, can proc every 0.2 seconds. Noxia has a target max health damage proc associated with it. Basilisk has armor shred associated with it and move speed bonus. Draconum gives you healing bonus, which is incredibly valuable. 15 haste, 45 power, and 40 armor is also a really good stat line for Draconum. Mindrazor gives you super fast clear with AoE passive damage, but also gives you 2% mana bonus as physical power on an item that gives big mana, and 15 haste is super valuable. Tainted Blade for anti-heal. You could sub this out for Tainted Scepter. Both of them are pretty interchangeable. I like Tainted Blade more on him the majority of the time for the slightly larger health pool and the percent bonus damage from abilities. Magnify is a great one, of course, a great stat line. They've changed it around to give more health now and more haste. 10% Omnivamp as well, super valuable. With an Armor Shred passive, realistically Magnify is going to add more damage in a single item than most items will, with that 15 haste and Armor Shred. Oblivion Crown, if you're building a lot of magical power items, you cannot turn down 25% bonus magical power. Caustica, percent magic armor pin, you can't turn that down. Gives you mana regen as well if you don't choose to build any other mana regen items. Azure Core, like I said, you can just build Alkrod, finish Azure Core later, but Azure Core does come with 15 haste, giving you solid damage and a shield proc to keep you alive in tough spots. World Breaker, scaling from your max health built to magical power is super valuable, but probably even more valuable than that is the stacking back end damage proc. Increase your magical damage dealt by 2% for 3 seconds, stacking up to 6 times is super valuable when all of his damage is coming out in ticks from both his Hellfire and his ult. Golem's Gift, like I said, stacking up to 5 times, giving you 5 magic power and 5 physical armor per stack is super valuable. 15 haste on the item as well, with 35 base physical armor. This is a crazy stat line for going against a physical damage solo laner. And then finally Cresselia, just because it's so cheap. Man, it's so cheap, it gives 20 haste. You really can't turn down that type of price for 20 haste. So that's what I've got for you guys. Pause it wherever you need. Go back, check the timestamps out. This was a lot. This was a lot of calculations. This was a lot of testing clips. But this hero is incredibly strong right now. He's obviously going to get nerfs. Rena should have got nerfs last patch, but we're not going to go into that. This all was the result of the fact that Akeron really does have 2 ults. Not really, because it doesn't one-shot people, but I'll put up a clip here of even at like level 9 where I was doing my testing at, with Mage Crest and 3 items online against a steal, I was able to hit like over 850 damage post-mitigation with Hellfire, just with 3 items on. So the damage is there. This is Rena Soulfire levels of damage on a melee hero, which is kind of crazy, to be honest. With a ranged CC just like Rena has, I mean, this stuff is crazy, man. It's super overpowered. They stacked so many effects into each of his abilities. I could realistically do a spreadsheet that dives this deep into each of his 4 abilities because they're so crammed with extra stuff. It's just crazy. Not a fan of how the balance has been going. Not a fan of how the game flow has been going away from MOBA and more towards hero shooter. Not a fan of the Fortnite World event. But hey, I'm a fan of some good old-fashioned calculations. So thanks everybody for stopping by. Let me know your thoughts. Are these the items that you're building? These were the items that were being these items on the table here were all the items that were being most frequently built on the Ometa City site on his builds page. Go check that out if you want to see those win percentages based off of those items. Are you building these? What are you building on them? Let me know your thoughts. Let me know your builds in the description or in the comments below. I'll respond to them and talk to you guys about how I think builds are going on him. Thanks everybody for stopping by. Come check us out on the live streams. We'll be going live every evening just about and enjoying Pred with the goons. We will catch y'all on the next one. Thanks for stopping by and keep enjoying Pred, folks. Just keep enjoying Pred.